Good afternoon, everyone. Winter weather advisory, extreme cold for New York and the New England states. Remnants of the super freeze, all-time historic cold event sweeping east out into the Atlantic. We're going to take a look at the record lows that have come in so far, still being compiled on that, but the media is going to focus on the heat abnormal that's coming through next week. But keep in mind, there's another polar freeze coming the week after next. All-time record lows in Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Detroit, all the major population centers on this map. And during the super freeze, urgent pleas to customers to turn down their thermostats, all-time record demand, heating companies jacking up prices for electricity and natural gas, billions lost during this storm, travel bans, power outages. But nobody seems to look back at the last 10,000 years of temperature. We're over on the right. It's been warmer several times before, and we're predicted to go even cooler as we enter this grand solar minimum. So events like this super freeze are going to happen yearly from this point forward. And during these uncertain times, I've teamed up with my Patriot Supply long-term food storage. A nice, affordable starter kit, 2-week food supply, 1,500 calories per day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinners, plus the 4-gallon storage containers included in that. This is a good first step in getting more self-sufficient. And if you click through the Prepare with ADAPT 2030 page in My Patriot Supply, you can get this starter kit for $75. Please remember there's a limit of 2 per household in this special offer. And if you also watch your videos on Brighteon, I'm uploading my channel there as well as a backup, a little more than 300 videos at the moment. Adapt 2030, Brighteon. Severe weather alerts. You knew this was going to be expected as the extreme super freeze that swept through the Midwest and Great Lakes moved eastward. New England states, New York on tap right now. Special weather advisories, extreme cold, and some of what we saw with all-time record cold temperatures being broken. Now, I don't think that's going to happen over New England states, but it's going to be below zero. You can take a look here on the temperature anomaly map. It is going to pass offshore out into the Atlantic, and it's going to be followed by extreme warmth. So we're going to take a look at the numbers here. Midwest states, polar vortex, all-time record lows. New state record in Illinois, 38 below zero Fahrenheit. Those are standing ground temperatures, not wind chills. But the media is so quickly going to focus on the heat and try to make you forget what just happened. This is such an outlier. It shouldn't be happening during what's considered global warming, but it is. So they're going to focus on the heat that's coming over the next week. But keep that in mind. Directly behind that, there's another one of these polar vortex events coming around the 9th and 10th of February. It's going to dip much further south this time. And then behind that itself, there's another one attached to it. So you're going to get this first frontal boundary and then followed with a second polar front connected to this. So expect more all-time record lows the second week of February to be broken again even further south. This time, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and pushing further south. Now, during this all-time record super freeze Midwest extremes, let's take a look at some of the numbers. Shout out to AccuWeather for putting all this information together. I was really impressed. Instead of them trying to hide the numbers, they actually put it all together. So discernible, so easy to understand. As well as they left all the comments intact, which I found fascinating. But here we are, Midwest extreme cold by the number. This was Thief River Falls. Real feel means wind chill included. So they had 77 below zero wind chills recorded there. But the on the ground, just standing temperatures, no wind chill, 56 below zero. This was in Cotton, Minnesota. And the lowest temperature recorded Mount Carroll, Illinois. New Illinois state record for all-time cold, 38 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. Now Chicago, finally, the missing numbers have been tallied. There was an hour of missing data. Imagine that. And it gave an all-time cold, low record to Chicago. And that was the hour of missing data that would have made this record a record. And suddenly it appears, and here we are. The old record was 21 below zero. New record, 23 Fahrenheit below zero. Chicago, New record. We got to jump back to 1996 to see Minneapolis this cold. That seems to be more of a cycle than a linear thing with us putting CO2 in the air. And also, first ever, 9 states, 14 degrees Fahrenheit below zero at the same time. This is also a new record that's been set. Official lows in Chicago, it was 21 Fahrenheit below zero, and this is with the missing hour of data not included. But once they upgraded that with the missing hour of data, because there was such a pushback saying, whoa, National Weather Service, NOAA, where's that missing hour of the cold that was going to push this into the all-time coldest temperature? Well, you saw what it was and ended up at 23 below zero. This dates back to 1870s. Again, it's a cycle that we're encountering here of cold. We're going to be starting to break back everything from 200 years to 300 years and finally to 400 years as we get into the depths of the grand solar minimum around 2023 in the first wave of the 2 waves that are coming. More all-time record lows, 33 below zero Fahrenheit, Malloy, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 30 below, Rockford, Illinois, 30 below. But look at some of the older records and see how much they were broken by. Now these are just about a 10% difference. But when we move forward in some of them, it's as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit difference. And the sampling of daily record lows, this is where it gets in to take a look at the temperature differences. International Falls, Minnesota, the old temperature in 1996 was 35 below zero, but then the new temperature was 45 below zero. 10-degree difference on the cooling side. That's gargantuan. You know, even if a lot of these records are being broken by 1 or 2 degrees Celsius in Australia from the heat, it's like 1 degree warmer than the previous record. Well, this is 10 degrees cooler than. Grand Forks, North Dakota, Madison, Wisconsin. Now, these are some of the newer records. 1985, that was a cold decade anyway. And I've noticed that the media keeps pushing this narrative of, oh, the 80s was much colder than this decade we're in now. This is a one-off event that's pushed back global warming by 2 days or something. But the 1980s was a cooler decade. Indeed it was. But I love how they shifted the narrative. Instead of really focusing on the fact that this smashed all these records, all-time record cold in states and locations, they want to try to push it. And the 1980s is colder. No, it's not. If all these records are being broken literally in a day, it means that this day was colder. Now take a look at Chicago. The difference there, 21 below zero to 12 below zero. Milwaukee, then we get back into these longer records, 1899. South Bend, Indiana, old record 11 below zero, 1936. New record 20 below zero. That's 8 degrees difference. And then Detroit, of all places, 1920, 7 below zero was the record. Now 14 below zero, set in the 1920s. This map here, temperature stations that have broken the daily low or the maximum high for the day. At least 340 locations. These are what are considered city or suburbs. These are not out in the rural areas here. Temperature stations picking this up. So they're trying to aggregate where they didn't have temperature stations of persons who actually had thermometers. So the numbers are still coming in because some areas out in the farmlands and areas that are further rural are also trying to be assessed in this whole super freeze. So National Weather Service in Duluth putting out the 8 p.m. temperatures, and you can see looking at incredible lows here. This is not wind chill, this is just standing on the ground temperatures. And the lighter colored teal, that's anything that's in the 20s or teens below zero. And as the storm continues to march eastward, and did, these were all the new record lows set through Ohio, Pennsylvania, and it's moving over to New York as we speak. Now also another impressive thing I found in AccuWeather is they left the comments intact. The commenters are talking about the sun affecting our weather. What about Greenland gaining ice? Grand solar minimum the next 30 years. Yeah, what if it's a super grand solar minimum? And they left all these comments intact, and I applaud that they are allowing the discussion at least to move forward in AccuWeather's chat board there. And also with some of the related articles, they're talking about the polar vortex and how much economic damage it did. They're looking for a total of around 14 billion lost out of the economy, and 5 billion of it lost permanently. Now what do they mean by that? Well, there were travel bans across 9 states. And some governors out there forbade traveling at all, nothing on the roads. It's too dangerous. You've slid off. There's nobody coming to rescue you. You would have frozen to death in your car. And the example I'd like to put out there is Chicago Zoo was closed. It's only the 4th time in 85 years that it's closed, but the polar bear is resting nicely. I wonder if that's a subliminal message about the polar bears with the ice in the Arctic. Then they go on to detail how many pipes have burst. Cleveland seems to have set the record for the most burst pipes. But in any good crisis, the energy companies are going to jack you for higher rates. All-time record demand on the gas, so they rose the rates about 50%, but overall they're going to look to gouge you for 6 to 7% because of this event, and it'll be a nationwide, not centered over the Midwest. They're going to spread it out so everybody can share. Yay, heating companies, thank you very much. And speaking of utilities and electrical companies here, as was predicted, power outages, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. Now, each of these individual events you have to look up, but it was not 36,000 customers. It was more like 75,000. Indiana was up around 60,000, and Wisconsin was not just as mere 8,000. That thing was pushing 100,000 at one point. And as the temperatures were descending and these power outages were starting to cut due to record demand, urgent pleas, the governor, please turn down your thermostat to 65 degrees Fahrenheit or lower to reduce the demand on the grid. And it really became an urgent plea because Michigan was going to go down next due to the demand. And as the storm swept east, and it still continues into New York, so they're still receiving some of these same warnings just further east, snow squall warnings. And you look at that, it looks like a nice square on the map, but when you look at the radar loop here, that looks ferocious. This is coming through Buffalo, and it's passing right over New York. So this is why the warnings are out for New York City and the New England states, because the exact same type of weather is heading there next over the weekend. Now, what I find it most fascinating is they still try to peg this whole thing on CO2 as the reason for all the record cold, which, see, doesn't make sense to me because my whole life growing up, CO2 meant record warmth, not record cold, but somehow they were able to flip it 180 degrees. So I want you to look here at the last 10,000 years of temperature. Ice core data, this is GISP2. But we just need to look back, 4,000 years or less to see 3 other temperature spikes above our temperatures today on this planet. Minoan warming, Roman warming, medieval warming. And I notice that they always stop at the medieval warming and say, oh, no, today's temperatures were the same as medieval warming. Okay, even if I give you that, Roman warming and Minoan warming, we're still even warmer than the medieval warming. So when you see temperature graphs like this, and knowing that we're heading into a grand solar minimum, and our temperatures are going to plunge on the planet even further over these next 20 years, when you see events like this, 2 and 2 actually equal 4. Yeah, this is an event that is tied directly to the sun going into a lower activity state. If you're not familiar with what a grand solar minimum is, all the links are below in the description box. You can check out some of the research. And also, Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, 30 minutes on the go, discussing these same issues about what a grand solar minimum is, how it's going to affect your family, your lives, and how you can protect yourself and prosper during this entire event. And if you're looking for snippets or news articles, 1 minute or less, run down on the Adapt 2030 social media feeds. And thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video.